Alright, so we've covered 9 points, 9 salutogenic discoveries, and I hope you can see really the multi-dimensional importance of the salutogenesis. But actually, shall I say that the last is far from being the least. Actually, the last one is probably the most important. I would go as far as saying that the essence of salutogenesis, if we think about it like really on a multi-dimensional scale and put it in a concise, compact definition, is very straightforward. Salutogenesis is the science of human thriving. That's the key. How the humans thrive. And this is amazing if you think about it, that this field has never been deliberately covered. You know, there are tons of sciences which study the human misery and human problems, but deliberate studies of human thriving, that's kind of never been on the agenda. And this is probably the most important lesson. But talking about the salutogenesis being the science of human thriving, I want to highlight this. It's the combined definition. What is thriving? Thriving is happiness plus health in one package. And this is really important to get. It's not about the absolute numbers here even. It's not about even absolute levels, because you might be saying, well, happiness, health, what does it have to do with us, right? When we are overstressed parents of the profoundly incapacitated children. Does it sound like kind of an ironic statement? Not at all. I would dare to say that actually, if we take the example, that lesson that came through the original salutogenic studies, so that core of the human thriving came from the worst possible conditions. But at the same time, you see, it's really important to understand that it wasn't really, if you think of, I put it in a different context, say, well, those women which became the original, inspiration and the source of data, shall I say, for Dr. Antonovsky, they went through years of this concentration camp experience. And this is important to understand. I'm bringing it back to the previous point. I'm bringing it back to the Amundsen way versus the Scots way. It wasn't about the torture. It wasn't about the single heroic deed. It was the ability to thrive under consistently multi-year harshest possible condition. Whether you take it physically, whether you take it metabolically, whether you take it psychologically. So that was the suppressed presence of, really the intensity of the distress, of the potential distress, was at its absolutely possible highest, compatible with human survival, right? And the key point here, and that's what he really highlighted, that in the sociology, right, we tend to hear those words like survivors, or the war survivors, or whatever, the concentration camp survivors, and so on. So, and that's the wrong meaning, because survivor, that's a different set. It's the ability to overcome, right? But typically, what means the word survivor, it doesn't imply thriving. Again, survivor is the one who didn't get below, right? Who didn't go off the cliff, the one who survived. It's again the same story. It's the meaning of getting away from. And the really fine, but critically important nuance here is that this is the study, this is the understanding of thriving. Harshest condition, but long-term thriving. And well, I would say you guys, to a great extent, being in the same boat. It's important to understand. Your team, you and the child, being an indivisible team, you are within the current, say, civilized condition, being at that harshest point. But still, the science of salutogenesis points out to you that it doesn't have to be management, it doesn't have to be the food stamps, right? It doesn't have to be just pity or like whatever, emotional compassion. It goes further. It goes further to the point that really showing that once this sense of coherence, this driver, this deep intrinsic stress converter into the eustress is present, everything changes. Even the harshest conditions could be turned into the source of thriving. So this is really a huge point, right? And we covered this in the previous two things, right? Talking about the level of challenge, such as ABR, consistent and deliberate performance, requiring the high enough level of sense of coherence. Then we talked about the internal architecture of the sense of coherence, that it's not enough just to have the high enough level, it's important to have all the components tied in and properly linked together and being able to like reinforce each other, as opposed to one, say, emotional component being the subsidy for the others. And then we talked about the conversion of this like driving fuel into the proper engine, talking about the Amundsen way versus the Scott way, right? And again, I want to highlight this point, that this is not just about the Amundsen way being the meticulous preparation and everything like this, right? It's not that. It's important, but that's secondary. The primary thing here is the ability to divide the challenge into the increments of the learning zone. And again, I want to highlight that Amundsen versus Scott, this is not simply about preparation, right? It's not about the thing that one was meticulous and prepared and really well organized and so on, and the other one was just like having a dream and wanted to toughen it up. Not at all. That's important, but that's secondary. More important component here is actually the other side. It's moving away from the idea of the sacrifice. This is the critical part. It's the ability to convert every single step of the journey, of the preparation, of the process. It's the ability to convert each and every single step into the progression forwards. And it's important to understand that sacrifice, it's glorified, right, in the public culture via the idea of, heroic deeds and so on. And it's really natural to take this on board, but that's not the right way. And this is what I talked about this before, but now I really have a much stronger basis to highlight this and really to refer to this salutogenic basis, the science of thriving. So this all together, right, brings us to the point number 10, which I haven't yet opened up. And I would say that this is this component. It's leading with happiness. So happiness and health promotion, meaning the salutary progress, these components, they are indivisible. I'm repeating this. It's indivisibility. Healthy and happy comes in one single package. That's really critical to understand. That it's not just a coping strategy. It's not, making a nice face or trying to sort of pretend that things are there, right? It's like a classic situation. A person has a tragedy, right? Comes to the doctor gives him an antidepressant in order to, well, don't feel bad anymore. We are not talking about this. That would be a complete misconception. That's a subsidy, right? So this is really a critical distinction. The most powerful notion of the salutogenesis, and particular of this like personal, the social part of it, the sense of coherence, that it's the converter. It's the deep intrinsic stress converter. So it's the ability to get the distress, the external distress, converted into the eustress. So whilst the sacrifice, whilst the coping, those would be two sides of the same coin. That would be two forms of subsidies, right? So being disengaged, that's a subsidy of sorts, just kind of closing the subject and chopping it off. But on the other hand, sacrifice is another way of a subsidy. It's what is called the allostatic stress. This is still detrimental. You are kind of drawing into the internal reserves. You are using this sort of visceral power, the visceral emotional link. You're using it as the nuclear power. So it's really, it can last you for years. But it's destructive for you and it's counterproductive for the child. So this is really important. It's not either or, right? It's not, well, I want to be on the sacrifice side. The sacrifice side is destructive. It's organized differently and you're never going to progress. You're never going to thrive. You can't think of it this way. And this is really important to understand because, well, I'm talking to you people with this high sense of coherence, and, well, many of you have been able to kind of fuel this drive via this emotional sacrifice thing. But I would strongly encourage you to kind of unlock this shield, go beyond this. Because, I started talking about this component that you need to get happy and that it has to be the loop of happiness. I started talking about it in my New Year message in 2009, so it's 3 years. But I didn't have this sort of deliberation and such a powerful background and truthfulness to it. Because I had a kind of a hunch, right, that it was more than just a coping strategy, but I wasn't able to back it up. But I would bring it over and over again for you to really think about it and really try to work it through it, sort of not just block it off, but work through it. This is critically important. Sacrifice doesn't work. It's necessary to find the source of happiness here. And actually, frankly, it's easier than it might look. The moment you sort of suspend this disbelief, suspend this, well, it has to be difficult, it has to be a sacrifice, it has to be a super effort and so on, it has to be wearing out. It doesn't have to. Because if you think about this, the best definition of success that exists in a, human psychology is this. Success is a measurable, right? Measurable progression towards a worthy goal. So there's no question that you have a worthy goal, right? But the key point here is the measurable progression. And this is really important thing to distinguish. We tend from the days of, able and disabled, valid and invalid. From those days when the people with disabilities were called, retards and crippled, from those days there is still this remaining aftertaste, this remaining kind of linked to that past, which is represented through this idea of the sacrifice and the achievement of certain absolute levels of whatever, biosocial fitness as the criterion of success. But what has been shown convincingly over the psychological studies, that actually for great majority of people it's intrinsically defined. You know, there have been studies involving, say, tens of thousands of people and the questionnaires and so on, where they, to the surprise of the psychologists, they found out that people, for instance, who won the lottery, their upshoot in emotional well-being lasted somewhere maybe from 12 to 18 months, and then they were back to their original state of emotional well-being, wherever they were. The same thing happened with the people who had to deal with the tragedy. Of course, they had some drop of the satisfaction with life, but then they got back. So it's pointing out that this is really a deep intrinsic thing rather than the dependence on the external circumstances. So I would argue this point that this is possible, this is critical, this is vital, this is convincingly shown by the sense of coherence, and if we put it into the practical terms, this is what I would like to really bring point by point. That happiness and success, happiness and achievement, and by achievement we're talking about the best physical progress, right? Best physical, social, emotional, intellectual, whatever progress of your child, it's tied in with your happiness. It's impossible. So the subsidy strategy, the subsidy process where you subsidize the child with your nuclear fuel of this emotional sacrifice, this is the dead end. It's a dead end for you because you get spent, and this is not the right way for the child, because this way you are not building those increments of progress properly. It's not being converted. So that's the first part. The second part, right, that it's together and they impact one another, right? So that happiness and health and happiness, they are linked with one another. They are not separate entities. It's basically two sides of the same coin. That's critical to understand. And it's not just, you know, the psychological blah blah and hope, don't get stressed and all these things. It's much deeper. And technically what we need to understand that the same way, in the same way as you learn technical skills, as we teach you the technical skills, right? Technical skills being one side. Well, happiness is something that has to be learned. It has to be a smart, deliberate pursuit of happiness, looped with your performance. Again, I haven't gone loony, I haven't gone off. I'm talking like with perfectly straight face, and I'm absolutely serious. And think about it, right? So we are brought up with this idea that happiness is something ethereal, but health is the same thing. Health and happiness are two most important, but two the worstly, there's the worst defined conditions. So we are really good in defining what is unhappiness and what is illness, and we run away from it. But without knowing where, without knowing the rate of progress, we are running like headless chicken. And because it's important to understand the same way as we have seen in the disease versus, anti-disease versus pro-health, the key point here, they are measured in different categories. They are trans-categorical. There are different symptoms, there are different syndromes, there are different ways, there are different sort of patterns of progress, right? If you think of it as in terms of the lines, right? Everything that has to do with the problem solving, it's like this. It's a fast response with then plateau. And you see this with all the therapies. And what's happening here, it's like investment and the compound interest. It's slower in the beginning, but then it powers up. So this is the key difference. This is the pro-health and this is pro-happiness curves. They are coming together and they are intertwined with each other. Whilst this being the stress and anti-disease. And they are inevitably coming this way. They are costly, they are not leading you anywhere. So that's important thing to really take on board. Very, very seriously, deliberately, suspending this shield, like removing this shield of, well, we all thought that we can't be happy. Happiness is not automatic. You're hearing this from me, right? I mean, I am the person who is, by definition, right? I'm far from being on the happy spectrum. I've been brought up to be always unhappy about something, right? To be unhappy with my own performance, to be unhappy with the things around, to, whatever is being achieved, the more that could be achieved. If we achieve that, we have to go there. And if you, ever heard me talking to you, right? So my default setting is to say, okay, guys, you've got this, but you've got all this set of, problems in front of you. These are the new goals and blah, blah, blah. So that's my default setting. So when you hear this from me, it's far from being, me just flipping through a couple of, like law of attraction or some other crap like this, and then starting to get wishy-washy and so on. This is really important, and that's the essence of this transformational process, that this investment, in the same way as your health is economy, which could be deliberately developed via the smart eustress, the same thing refers to the happiness parameter, right? So yes, with the distress, with the entire challenge of the disability to begin with, that's the happiness microeconomics, that's the happiness economy of yours, which has shrunk, right? So this is this anti-symmetrical situation, a shrunk health economy of your child, which is kind of very small here, and a shrunk the shrunk health economy of your child and the shrunk happiness economy of yours. Now, the thing is that both of those are intertwined. They are linked together. And the same way as we expand incrementally this one, it has to come with the incremental changes. These two are linked and they are potentiating and reinforcing each other. And if this component is not present, if you are not backing up the health changes with the incremental corresponding changes in your happiness level, that's not going to work. Now, you might be asking me this question, like, how come? How are we going to measure happiness? And, because that's a super elusive category. And, I'm going to give you a brief idea, right? And it's no less elusive or no more elusive than the category of health. And this is the power of the sense of coherence. Actually, you can think of it as the basis of what I called the happiness equation. If you think about it this way, right? So within the sense of coherence, we have three components. We have the meaningfulness, we have the comprehensibility, and we have the manageability. So these are the three components. So what they would be corresponding to if we are translating them into like physical and emotional and so on. So that would be very straightforward. So meaningfulness, I should probably sort of start with tangible, right? So this is the body. What are the capabilities of the body? Well, whether it comes to the child, whether it comes to you, that's the level of skill, right? That's the technical sensitivity, that's the technical ability to deliver this particular proper, this particular essence of eustress. That's a technical side. Now, the next thing here is the comprehensibility. So this is going to be more the mind. The ability to deliberately understand the specifics of the task. And meaningfulness, that would go towards the soul, spirit, whichever way you're going to put it. So now, these three things, they are very much tied in together, and if we then rewrite those elements into the components, that would be quite straightforward. So we can have three active and three positive, three negative, and we can have it in the kind of counter phases to each other. So the essence of the happiness equation is quite simple. Well, if we look at it from the very basis, so when we talk about the positive feelings, right, the positive side, there would be three rather different and fundamental definitions. Joy, pleasure, satisfaction. So what do they correspond to? I hope that you can see the link with the previous slide. So the satisfaction comes from the comprehensibility, right? So this is the mind part. And this is the last one. Now, the deepest one, corresponding to this indescribable feelings of joy and love and so on, so that would be an absolutely non-verbal, right? So this is the verbal part. This is articulable. We set the goal and we try to achieve it, right? So satisfaction is the reflection of goal achievement. But that has to be the last thing, which is actually being the over-highlighted currently in the entire educational thing and so on. So basically, what is important is this meaningfulness, the first fundamental connection that you have with your child. And this is the absolutely non-verbal side. This is the first essential defining thing. This is the ability to be near, to be quiet, and nonetheless feel that profound, deepest connection. I mean, in the modern world of detecting everything and so on, that might sound like, well, what are the instruments to define this? Well, you are the instrument yourself. If you feel it, it exists. Let's put it like this. And the third component here is obvious, right? So this is the part of the manageability and the body. So this is the physical pleasure, right? So now, of course, on the other side, for those three, come the other extremes. The extremes being, for joy, we have the fear, right? For pleasure, we have, well, aches and pains. And for satisfaction, we have the frustration. So these are the obvious things. So now, if we talk about the deliberate pursuit of the happiness equation, what does it mean? That means that we have to start installing the virtuous cycles. The virtuous cycles are the ones which are promoting the development of these components. And again, we have to start with the foundation. And what is the foundation? It's this. The non-verbal side. That's the foundation. It's those simplest things. The hug, the stroke, the ability to just be with the child, right? Not to do the task of being a carer or a teacher or an entertainer. Those are these things. And they are by far secondary or tertiary. Deep connection. That's the first thing which stems, which kind of highlights and brings those points. And at the same time, right, that's the opposite side. To reduce fear, to deal with the aches, and to overcome the frustrations. Now, this, and especially the fear being the deepest point, like think about it. Right? So that gives us a completely different perspective. Like think about the child with the internal decapitation. The starter. What is this? This is this deepest embedded fear. So when you work with the good old egg or with whatever, 3Q technique or whatever, if you service the sensory connection, because that deals with the what is fear, right? So fear is the inability to control the deepest sensory inputs. So the fear is the most primary thing. And now if we talk about the kids with the cerebral palsy, that's the disconnect within this basic fundamental sensory map. That's the source of these deeply seated fears. So how you can help? Your investment is to bring this connection of the sensory map and thus reduce this. But then the more you're present for your child, the more you create this sensation. The same story, aches and pleasures. Fortunately, people who try to leverage this aches and pains component for you, well, they are over highlighting it, right? This is, fortunately, experientially, this is not the greatest challenge in the child with the cerebral palsy if you are being smart, right? So these things, of course, might become a problem, like in the teenage period and later. But, say until the age of 10, that's not really much of the deal in most scenario, right? Especially if you don't do silly things like, forcing the walking and other components. And frustration, paradoxically enough, with our obsession with the speech, with our obsession with the academic learning, with proving to ourselves and proving to others that our child here is being intelligent enough, right? So why would you be doing this? Because you want to prove to the others that your child is not some kind of a vegetable, but he's being or she's being really a worthy individual, right? But again, this is the wrong way of looking at it. You have to start this entire endeavor, right? This entire journey with this fundamental standpoint that your child, no matter how severely he or she is affected, no matter how well or how poorly they can express themselves, it has to start with this definition of the unconditional worth. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. If you have this deep connection, that's it. That's the ultimate judgment. Everything else, whatever the people say around, this is secondary, tertiary, quaternary, or whatever. This is fluff. That is the fundamental. This is the anchor from where everything starts. If you have this, if you're able to invest into the child's health, so that you will get rid of the fears and you would be able to build this deep emotional connection to promote joy. This is the most solid foundation. This is like the anchor, the attractor, which is going to bring in all this gradual increase, which is going to lead to thriving. This is critical. But now it actually gets more elegant if we continue to follow our sense of coherence, because these are the polarities, right? So these are the polarities of the plus and minus. So this is the plus and this is minus. So the idea of pursuing happiness here becomes quite straightforward. So the virtuous cycles are everything that promotes the plus, and the vicious cycle is everything that promotes the minus, right? So basically our virtuous cycle would be the one which would be bringing more on the plus side, and the ones which would be reducing the manifestations of the negative. That's very straightforward. And the deeper we go, the broaden and build. But there is one subtle aspect here which I want to highlight, right? So to be really truly salutogenic here. So to get this driver, you have to see what's underneath. And underneath there is the fine element. Those would be the subtleties. And actually this is the point, this is where we have to start. There are some simple moves that we can do externally, but fundamental part is internal. So here, that's, if we start with the body, what are we having here? It's a difference between relaxation and tension. So tension is the source of all troubles. Tension is like the car which is being idle but really revving the engine. It's the loss. It's the economy which is having profound leaks. So therefore our first primary goal is the one of removing all manifestations of tension and bringing the components of relaxation. Even though sometimes tension allows the cerebral palsy child to cheat, right? To kind of get himself together and to get some action going, to reach satisfaction. But that's a fake way of getting it. The same thing with yourself. Sometimes tension, right? The sacrifice allows you to feed this satisfaction, but you feed the satisfaction at the expense of this. So that's a wrong strategy. So both sides need to relax and need to connect to this deeper component. Now, for reaching this, we have to get this next part, right? So we're getting closer to the mind part, right? So which is the awareness versus the disengagement. Alright? So now, this belongs to you and this belongs to the channel, right? What we want, before we start talking about, all this bombardment of the channel with books and so on, what is this? This is the connection between the deep and distant senses, right? Now, if the child has a disconnected head, if he has troubles putting together the positioning of the head with the control of the eyes, with the control of the head and so on, well, how the hell we are going to, why would we try to reach satisfaction here? We are missing this component of the proper alertness, awareness and the link. So we have to build the integration of the senses first and then get this point, right? So, and the last component, but not the least, the deepest one, right? It's maybe difficult to explain, but I think each and every one of us knows when we hear it. So this is the sense of presence versus, presence versus absence, right? So you know when the person is being absent, right? We feel it when we talk to people, when we connect to people, when we hear when people kind of half listen or being blank or whatever. And even if they pretend, we have an extremely good detector of this, right? As the human species, we have this extremely good detector being able to find out whether the person is present or not. We lie to ourselves, right? We are good in fooling ourselves on this, but we definitely feel this in the others. So this is the important thing. Presence, relaxation, awareness, right? So you can put it, awareness versus maybe, disengagement might even go here, right? But when we talk about the awareness, this is as opposed to taking things for granted, right? As opposed to just unconditional trust, right? So just, reliance on the subsidy of the external expertise, right? So, not doing things automatically, not paying attention to the components and elements, right? Not being in the process. So that would be the linkages of the awareness. So that is a very simple framework which is cohesive and which entirely links in to the three essential components of the sense of coherence. But this component alone, right, again, that's what I call the happiness equation, right, or the happiness quotient. But this thing alone is simple enough, comprehensive, but at the same time is going to allow you to track how are you doing. Because again, we're getting back to this essential definition. What is success? Success is the movement towards the measurable progression towards the worthy goal, right? So this is where we are moving. And when we talk about the sense of coherence and the fact that this is the example of the thriving, right? Once again, we have, in the current studies of the help of this self-improvement and so on, there is one big flaw, right? They try to chase people who show the largest success which is measurable in their social currency, like the people who got wealthy, the people who got famous, the people who got whatever. But that's not the way. When we get back to the sense of coherence, this is actually a different story, right? This is the story about the rate and about the magnitude of the personal achievement. If you think about it this way, it would be very different. Like, think about it. You see, for instance, if we talk about the person who has been at the it's the number, let's put it like this, right? It's the number of steps, the number of leagues that you are able to travel. That's the true definition of the success. Meaning that if you are starting with your child, say, at the -5th league, and thanks to your work, you arrive to the -1st league, that is a much larger achievement that has to be celebrated comparing to the person who started in this, like at the 1st league and only made it to the 3rd one. So you had to work and you had to overcome, and your journey, your success, your achievement is much greater. And maybe at the current kind of social currency doesn't rate like this yet, but that's outdated. That's going to change at some point, because this is the way that the science goes. I mean, as I already said, everything that I do is based on this idea of the scientific transplantation. I'm specializing in the interdisciplinary arbitrage, right? And what I see with the sense of coherence and with this linkage to this fundamental definition, success being the measurable progression towards the worthy goal, is the key transition, right? So what is the source of our current scientific state? Well, you'd be surprised, but the last, say, 400 years of scientific achievement are based on the very simple thing, that back in 1600s, Galileo has moved from absolute figures to the studies of rate of change, from measuring velocity to the measurement of the acceleration. Then it was put together, so basically that's Newton stepped on this and expanded this whole story. And this thing transitioned from absolute measurements to the rate of change. That has been the basis which brought us through the being at full mercy of nature to be the masters of nature that we are now, right? To be able to build all this civilization. But when it comes to the human side, when it comes to the biological side, when it comes to the healthy and happy, that has never existed, right? So the positive program is not possible without the ability to measure the rate, focus at the rate of change, and actually put the rate of change at the heart of the entire equation. And that's what we see with the sense of coherence, right? And that's why I'm so absolutely, blown away. This is such a powerful thing. It has all these components, right, that I've just described, right? So that's why, if you deconstruct it, you see what you can probably feel, or I hope that I managed to convey this message, why I do think that this is really, as we measure it from this wisdom quotient, sense of coherence, the entire salutogenesis, this is so, it's a sudden power leap which emerged in an obscure domain of medical science, in the least expected site. We have this absolutely improbable, amazing theoretical breakthrough. And the moment once we sort of take it out of there, just clean it up a bit, take it as a blueprint and start bringing it into the different domains, you can see how powerful it is. It's powerful towards the health, it's powerful towards happiness, it's powerful towards the child, it's powerful towards you, it's the entire linkage and combination. Well, I'm an excitable person when I see this high level of wisdom, and when I see the things which actually allow to address the reduction of the long-standing frustrations from you, right? Because obviously I am the person who is very strongly driven by this, by the ability to comprehend things, right? And that's what I'm saying. It's my meaningfulness sensor which always kind of been telling me that there is something there, that this is, this is more to the idea of happiness than just, a coping strategy. And this really amazingly ties in things together. And of course, as I said already in the previous, few chapters, that we are going to transform, we are going to try to help you with this. We are going to transform our own, say, admission policy. We are going to transform the communication lines. But at the same time, right, I want to really make it sure that we are talking the same language, and it's a joint effort. It's a joint effort, and once again, we really have to look at this from the perspective. We've got the tools, we've got the techniques, which we now even which I've started putting separately, right? So the ABR techniques being going under the label of transfascial viscoelastic stimulation, whilst the ABR itself being more of a system, right? Being more of a system which is more parent-oriented, parent-child oriented. The overall, this integration, the salutogenic integration oriented rather than being the technical side itself. So it's been a lot of information. I must say that, well, now you are watching the 10th discovery, and instead of what I cautiously intended to be a 40 plus minute share and exchange, obviously has turned into much larger one. But I hope that you get the benefit out of it, that you get that reinforcement of your own sense of coherence, and I hope that with this I'm helping you in clarifying things better and in making sure that you are actually starting to get out of the overwhelm, right? I understand when I talk, it's easy to get overwhelmed, it's easy to get lose the perspective, but thinking about the 10 salutogenic discoveries, it becomes very straightforward. We are able to reach the positive health. It's a completely different salutary definition. Salutary definition is based on your ability to deliver, the eustress, the transformation into your child's body, and this becomes the basis of growing the health assets. That's like you're building your child's health account, right? The bank account in health units. And then as those health units grow and improve, this is that transformation from the depressed economy after the brain injury into the gradual build of from just subsistence to comfortable life to the increase of this biological prosperity for your child, right? So that goes via the broaden and build, and if we talk about it under the big label, that will be the process of continuous incremental developmental advancement. We are talking about how we can get the best case scenario for your child's initial distress economy situation. And then we tie everything in with you. To be able to do this consistently, you need a strong sense of coherence yourself, right? Your sense of coherence has to be also coherent within it. We are not looking for the unfair subsidies. We're not looking for the heroes. We are looking for the Amundsens, right? We're looking for the people who would be able to get the deliberate, consistent action, which would be self-perpetuating, upwards going virtuous cycle. And all this ties in with this crescendo, the salutogenesis being the science of human thriving. Happiness, health, and success in one single package. So I hope that this has been helpful, and with the salutogenic salute, I'm leaving you on to ponder and to think about all this. Well, of course, let me know what you think, leave your comments, send your questions, rewatch the videos several times, because this is really something that is going to take time to sink. Right? The more questions you ask, the more responses you bring, the better communication we're going to help, because and to make it into the two-way street. Okay? Salutogenic salute.